As Roland says, my name is Tom Waidzunas. I'm from Temple University, and my talk today is titled LGBTQ plus STEM Professionals, Systemic Inequalities and Forms of Resistance. Before I start the talk, I do want to acknowledge that Lynn Conway, an engineer who's made extremely important contributions to the field of very large-scale integrated circuit design and computing architecture. She passed away this week. She was a trans woman. She came out as trans in the 1960s while working for IBM and was announcing her intent to transition, and she was fired at that time. Then she went on to live as stealth in the while working at Xerox PARC Laboratory, being known as a woman. And while she was there, she made these really important contributions to VLSI design. In fact, we might not even be having this symposium today online were it not for Lynn Conway. And she's made really important contributions to LGBTQ inclusion, organizing, and has been an important role model, especially for trans folks in STEM professions. So I just wanted to acknowledge that she passed away this week. So the research I'm going to talk about today is from something we call the STEM Inclusion Study, which is research funded by a collaborative grant from the National Science Foundation. My collaborator, Aaron Seck, is at University of Michigan, and I'm at Temple. This is a mixed method study that's the first nationally representative study of STEM professionals in the US to examine processes of LGBTQ inclusion. And the study also attends to intersections with race, ethnicity, gender, and disability. We have a website now for the study, steminclusionstudy.com, where we're going to be posting all of our results. We're still producing papers from this data. And we also have I also have a book coming out with a couple of co-authors I'll talk about near the end here. So literature on LGBTQ STEM professionals in the United States at the professional level has pretty consistently found patterns of experiences of social exclusion within workplaces, experiences of professional devaluation, meaning people's scientific merit is devalued. People will see somebody's LGBTQ and not think they're a credible scientist. That's common in this literature. And there are also various career obstacles that are faced by folks. I put in here a study, since this is a biology conference. I recognize that biology is very, very complex. There's many different kinds of biology. Evolutionary biology is computational biology. But I wanted to put in some stuff about biology in this talk. This paper by Cooper, Brownwell, and Gormley looks at college biology instructors coming out in the classroom. And this is a table from their paper from the Journal of Women and Minorities in Science and Engineering, showing that most are out to some colleagues at work. In their study, they studied these college biology professors. Most were out to their colleagues at work, but very few were out to the students in the biology classes that they teach. The teachers, biology teachers, expressed that they wanted to be out to be role models for their LGBTQ students, but they were very concerned about losing credibility in the classroom. Other literature on LGBTQ and STEM at the professional level in the US has been focused on specific disciplines. The Atherton study was a survey of and interviews with LGBTQ plus physicists. And then there's a study by SEC and FAM on workplace disadvantages for LGBT employees in STEM-related federal agencies. And then in STEM generally, Yoder and Matthijs, our research team that have done a national survey for LGBTQA individuals in STEM careers, and they developed a model of queer STEM identity development based on that research. Yet our research is the very first to use representative samples across the STEM community in the United States. Most of this is based on convenience samples. So the STEM inclusion study is a mixed method study that uses a survey and interviews drawn from participants in the survey. The survey has 25,324 participants. Of those, 1,006 are LGBTQ. The survey was conducted with 21 STEM professional societies based in the US, including 8 national flagship natural life, physical sciences, and mathematics societies, 5 national flagship engineering societies, 6 interdisciplinary societies, and 2 STEM teaching-focused societies. The interviews involve pilot data that we collected from 2 NASA centers in the US, with 27 interviews from those, mostly LGBTQ folks, but a few allies. Then we have a nationwide sample from the STEM Inclusion Study Survey that is 90 people. We had originally intended to have many more, but we got stopped when the pandemic hit. And we also have interviews with leaders of organizations promoting LGBTQ inclusion. And these interviews were they were done from 2015 to 2020. That's following the Obergefell decision that legalized gay marriage, so that provided for benefits for a lot of folks in the workplace that they were struggling for with domestic partnerships prior to that. And then this is also prior to the Bostock decision, which banned workplace discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity in the United States. So the first paper I want to talk about is the paper that Roland mentioned, Systemic Inequalities for LGBTQ Professionals in STEM, that we published in Science Advances in 2021. In this, we theorize STEM professional culture primarily through the schema of STEM excellence. STEM culture tends to involve a dualism between the technical and the social, where the technical is valued and the social is devalued. So a lot of people in STEM believe that they just work with things and not people. So things that are seen as political or social are often devalued. So this often applies to people who are trying to promote inclusion in STEM. Their work is devalued because it's not seen as part of STEM. It also, the schema of STEM excellence also is based on meritocracy and notions of individual achievement, individual creative brilliance, and it's supposed to be apolitical, where identity is deemed as political or devalued. In addition to this, I'm also in my work looking at the role of neoliberalism in STEM professional culture. More and more, the institutions of STEM are infused with logics of neoliberal capitalism, including universities more and more. So aspects of this culture involve having business acumen, also meritocracy and individual achievement, and aggressiveness or assertiveness in achieving business goals. And this regime of diversity and inclusion that's come up within neoliberal times is seen as having benefits for business primarily. It's kind of the most effective, or what's perceived as the most effective argument for inclusion these days in STEM is often that it has benefits for innovation. Now, while STEM is seen as an apolitical space, Luis Leiva and his colleagues have theorized it, though, as actually very politicized as a white cis heteropatriarchal space, where this ideology of meritocracy and apoliticization masks a politics, a deeper politics that favors certain people who are white, cisgender, heterosexual, male, and actually does have that politics built into it. So this is these are some of our findings from the survey. The dark bars are LGBTQ folks, and the white bars represent our non-LGBTQ population. And we find that there are significantly lower career opportunities, experiences of having sufficient resources, and experiences of comfort whistleblowing for LGBTQ folks compared to their non-LGBTQ peers. So these are like the first nationally representative findings showing this sort of disadvantage in the United States. With regard to workplace experiences, LGBTQ folks do experience higher levels of professional devaluation compared to their non-LGBTQ peers, higher amounts of social exclusion, meaning not being invited to lunch or experiencing joking in the workplace about LGBTQ people, and then significantly higher percentage of LGBTQ folks compared to non-LGBTQ folks have experienced harassment in the workplace. Now, some of these outcomes we used in the survey measures from actual medical instruments that examine things like depression and insomnia, et cetera. So for LGBTQ folks in STEM, we found that minor health problems were higher, insomnia was higher, feeling stress from work and feeling depressive symptoms were higher. And then with regard to attrition, LGBTQ folks are more likely to think about leaving their STEM job or have plans to actually leave their STEM profession. So again, these are the first nationally representative results showing these trends. Then I do want to talk about a paper that Erin published on her own, the intersectional privilege of white able-bodied heterosexual men in STEM. What Erin did here in this paper is she looked at these quantitative results across 32 different categories, and they all the different permutations of gender, race, LGBTQ status, and disability status, just to compare how they fared with regard to some of these measures. And this is one of the graphs from her paper that shows all the way on the left, you see the control group, heterosexual white men without disabilities. And as people add these marginalized identities here, or marginalized statuses, you can see that there's a gradual decline in the quality of work life for these folks. So on the very left, you have heterosexual white men without disabilities. On the very far right, you have LGBTQ Black women with disabilities. And all of the different 32 permutations are across this graph. And this is a measure of experiences of social inclusion at work. So this really shows that LGBTQ experiences are very diverse. It's really important to pay attention to intersectionality. This is another one of her graphs of experiences of professional respect at work among STEM professionals by intersectional demographic category. And again, it shows this drastic decline as you add these different statuses or change these statuses away from the norm of heterosexual white men without disabilities. There's I didn't show all the graphs from this paper, but she also has a graph that shows the inverted trend about income. And then it also shows other sorts of measures like attrition as well, or plans to leave STEM are much higher for folks in these more marginalized categories. And then another paper that Erin and I have from this data is called LGBTQ at NASA and Beyond, Work Structure and Workplace Inequality Among LGBTQ STEM Professionals, that was in the journal Work and Occupations in 2022. And this was based on, first of all, an interview study with folks in a NASA center that we have to call NASA East and one that we have to call NASA South in order to protect the folks in the study. The NASA IRB required us to use those pseudonyms. So what we found was that the NASA South LGBTQ folks actually fared better in their workplaces than at NASA East. And that was really strange to us because we thought, being in the South, it must be more difficult to be LGBTQ at work compared to being in the East, where people at that time were much more pro-LGBTQ. And there was even gay marriage was popular in that area. So we were really kind of taken aback by this. So we went in and investigated this further. What we found was that NASA East is a NASA center that has more short-term project-based work groups, and there on the campus there would be maybe 200 or more missions happening simultaneously. And folks would be pulled from an engineering pool and a science pool and a technical pool and a management pool to form these short-term project-based work groups. So that required folks who were LGBTQ to navigate identities with new people, new coworkers very rapidly. Like one of the managers described it as pickup basketball. But at NASA South, people were in long-term work groups with more center-wide missions. Everybody was involved in the mission, in the same mission, and people weren't shuffled around. They were in these long-term work groups. So at NASA East, Valerie, who's a lesbian scientist, described that culture as being very fractal, based on what projects we were working on. Cassandra, a trans woman engineer, recently quit because, according to a straight male manager, Ted, people made fun of her all the time. And Janice, who's a lesbian engineer, said, "I feel like I'm coming out all the time." Whereas at NASA South, Dave, a gay male engineer, described it as being a big family. Patricia, a lesbian engineer, said that my little piece of software is part of this big piece of the group that went into this bigger piece. So there's a kind of sense of center-wide cohesion. And Bonnie, who's a trans woman engineer, described 90% of the people in her unit accepted her, and there was an end to hostility after 5 years after her transition. So the story that we kind of got from this was that people in more long-term work group arrangements have more time to sort of work out their coming out arrangements and their relationships with coworkers, whereas these short-term project-based work groups, which are becoming pretty common in a lot of STEM workplaces, they tended to be more difficult for LGBTQ folks in STEM. This we also found looking at the large survey also bore out. So we had questions in the survey about whether you're in long-term work groups or short-based work groups, and the folks in the short-term work groups were much more statistically likely to have poor workplace outcomes and feel professional devaluation. How much time do I have? I can't see a clock. I should have my full screen.
So about 20 minutes or so. I mean, that would include any questions. So maybe if you want to talk for maybe 10 more minutes, and then we'll have questions.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you. So I do want to show, we're still working on some more papers from this data, from the qualitative data. So I do want to talk about some of those findings. Some of the career costs that we find for LGBTQ folks working in STEM is the need to expend extra energy. Sort of, we're thinking about this sort of like as unpaid labor. So Drew, a white gay scientist, described being out or being in a pretty hostile anti-LGBTQ climate, saying it's made me very cautious, it's expended a lot of energy. It has made it so that I probably missed opportunities by not simply going out there and competing for things out of a need to feel that I'm carefully maintaining good relationships and not throwing rocks at a wasp's nest. So I've lived with a hypervigilance that means that you're not going to be moving boldly in areas where there might be opportunities. And Drew's an older scientist and really saw younger scientists as having a lot more opportunities and a lot more vision, or not having to maybe deal with these kinds of situations as being as difficult as Drew's were. But still, this theme of having to expend extra energy, having to compartmentalize one's life, having to constantly navigate and be vigilant about losing credibility in a workplace takes a toll, and it's a lot of extra work. Another career cost that we found was that for folks who are going into college looking to pursue a STEM career who are LGBTQ, often had to sort of figure out which college was going to be their coming out college and which college was going to be their STEM focused college. This is a big additional sort of burden to put on college students who are trying to pursue a STEM career. If you don't have that burden, you just go to the best STEM school that you can go to. You don't worry about the culture and whether or not it's going to support you in coming out. So what we found was a sort of pattern where one school, maybe a graduate school or even a postdoc, would be the coming out place, and then one school would be the STEM focused place. So Alex, who's a white pansexual non-binary scientist, chose his undergraduate institution because he said there was a bridge where student organizations would post their boards about when they're meeting and what they are. And he saw that there was an LGBTQ association there, and it was just like, I'm home. So that was the reason to pick that. And then he selected his graduate institution because he realized doing the PhD, he needed to be at a place that's not going to have the same kinds of distractions he was finding when he was an undergraduate, partying in the neighborhood and things like that. So it was really easy to focus on that and not focus on all my studies. So he was really making these decisions kind of in a step fashion. And we found that in many different narratives. Another thing we're exploring is gender differences in LGBTQ workplace experiences. Many women in STEM experience sexism and sexual harassment. But there was a belief among many folks that if you're a lesbian in STEM, you have some kind of a boost over heterosexual women somehow. And a common workplace strategy for women was to enact masculinity. So Lisa, a white lesbian scientist, describes this. She says, I think this is a very male-identified culture. I will tell you that I personally butch it up at work. I'm kind of a soft butch, but I'm more butch at work than I am at home. I wear dresses on the weekends once in a while, never wear a dress at work. And I feel like that is about the gender. Being butch feels more powerful at work. It's easier to get listened to. It's easier to get a sentence finished. It's easier not to be talked over. And so in the same way that you're encouraged to lower your voice to finish sentences on the down rather than on the up, right? It helps to get people to listen to what you have to say, to butch it up a little bit. Now, what we're finding in the quantitative data is that there's a sort of hierarchy of credibility and social inclusion that happens in the workplace that in STEM that really has more to do with gender conformity, where there's this sort of belief in a boost when enacting masculinity and also being lesbian. What we're finding is that the people who are cis male who enact masculinity, of course, are the norm and have the most credibility attributed to them. And then below that is women who enact femininity. And then below that is people who are non-binary or gender non-conforming. So really gender non-conformity seems to be, in our large quantitative sample, the biggest credibility liability. And this gained expression for many trans women or trans folks that we talked to in the field. Brenda, who's a white trans woman engineer, reiterated this theme of needing to stay in your lane. And so she said, for me, my experience inside of a military culture is reinforced. You've got, two lanes. You've got male and you've got female, and you've got to damn well stay in your lane. So yes, there's definitely a pressure in such a professional environment to adhere to the binary. But that also works in your favor too, because as long as you're staying in your lane, one of the dominant paradigms in an environment like that is professionalism. So we met some trans folks who are actually older, who felt that non-binary folks were sort of creating waves and being disruptive. And a lot of non-binary folks would downplay being non-binary and be read as male or female. That wasn't universally the case. And then with racial differences in LGBTQ workplace experiences, people of color experience visibility in the workplace and in this sort of white cis hetero patriarchal space. And often we would find that their racial identity was much more of a priority to them than their LGBTQ identity, although that was not universal. But this is one rare case. Pamela, who's an Asian American engineer, explained to an out gay white cisgender male interview, she likened the ways white, out and proud LGBTQ people often cannot understand her experience with sexual identity to ways that men do not perceive some dangers that women do. She said, think about women, if you park in a dark place at night, your gender is going to kick right in at night. Men don't think about walking to their cars at night. Well, sometimes you do, but not in general about your safety. It's the same thing to me about identity. It's about where you feel safe and comfortable. When asked about what kinds of advice she might give for a young STEM professional navigating workplaces as a non-straight and or non-cisgender and not as a person of color, she described, what I would say to the person is be your authentic self. It's whenever you get comfortable enough, that's when you can. But to me, the bottom line is being your authentic self. And sometimes being authentic means, till I figure out how things work, I totally agree. We wish we didn't have to do that. The world was free and everybody could be who they are. But the reality of it is to be safe, be your authentic self, whatever makes you feel comfortable. This is a sort of different notion of authenticity than is often valorized in LGBTQ circles, this out and proud. She has a sort of different notion of authenticity based on safety. I also want to refer to this great article by Sabrina Ali Mohammed called Thinking Outside the Rainbow, Women of Color Redefining Queer Politics and Identity, which sort of describes this dynamic of eschewing LGBTQ identities, which can be alienating in some ways and empowering in others. Okay, and finally, we have a book that's going to be coming out in the spring called Outdoing Science, LGBTQ STEM Professionals and Inclusion in Neoliberal Times that I wrote with two of my former research assistants, Ethan Levine and Brandon Fairchild. That's going to be coming from University of Massachusetts Press next spring. And this is a sort of social history of activism promoting LGBTQ in STEM over the years, from the 1970s to the present. And this just shows, this is a news article from 1983 in The Advocate showing the organization LAGLS. That's one of the first regional gay and lesbian STEM groups that was formed in the United States. This is a list here of some of the other early regional societies: TAGS, LAGLS, High Tech Gays, WAGGLS, HAGGLS, BAGLS, DAGLS, and GATES. Just some of the regional groups that eventually became what is known as NOGGLS or Noggle Step. This is a letter that was published in the journal Science in 1980, following a very early meeting at the AAAS, where some folks, actually these are social scientists and psychologists, spoke out about the effects of homophobia on science and called for an end of homophobia. This led to the formation of the organization NOGGLS, or National Organization of Gay and Lesbian Scientists, which in a few years later became Noggle Step, the National Organization of Gay and Lesbian Scientists and Technical Professionals, that has been a sort of hub for caucuses within STEM professional societies, regional affiliates. It itself became an affiliate of AAAS and also has been an important facilitator of producing employee research groups in corporations and federal agencies and universities. In the 90s, Noggle Step was also an important platform for promoting the science of sexual orientation, the biological science of sexual orientation and gender identity. It was an important platform for promoting that within AAAS and informing the public. And also the group Noggle Step really grappled with the potential for genetic screening. They accepted the biology of sexual orientation and gender identity as something real that maybe has a genetic component. But we're really concerned as LGBTQ scientists, having an LGBTQ perspective, what that would imply for the potential dangerous use of that knowledge and possible genetic screening. But now we're in more of a professional development era of this kind of organizing. So we have groups now like OSTEM and Out to Innovate. Noggle Step rebranded as Out to Innovate. In the early 2000s, IBM sponsored the creation of the student group OSTEM, and Noggle Step seems to have kind of followed suit. There's been a lot of pursuit of corporate funding and has really changed the missions of these organizations towards much more professional development. So in the earlier education era, we show in the book how the activists really were more arguing about having a gay and lesbian perspective in STEM, arguing that homophobia can corrupt scientific knowledge, to today where inclusion is necessary to prevent lost talent and it's believed that diversity produces innovation. and people who can bring their full selves to work are more efficient and loyal. And it's kind of a big transformation that I find kind of head spinning from being, you know, a gay person in the 90s who couldn't imagine coming out in this workplace. Back in this earlier era, coming out as LGBT could be grounds for being fired, but now coming out as LGBTQ within the diversity and inclusion regime potentially makes one seen as a more productive worker within this regime of diversity and inclusion, helping to produce innovation, helping to represent the company as having a good moral base. So that's all. I thought I had an end slide, but I have some extra slides there with numbers. So thank you very much. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Tom, that was really great, really informative. There's a question in the chat. I'll read it for you. Maybe you can see it. This is from Aaron Setaraman. He says, "Hi, Tom, great work, and hi from a fellow Temple owl." Me too. It was a postdoc at Temple in the Center for Computational Genetics and Genomics a decade back. Can you comment on LGBTQ workplace experiences in the field of computational biology specifically? Curious how we match up compared to overall trends in STEM. I don't know if you divided people by fields like that.
We have more work to do on looking at the data by field. We did ask a kind of general question in the survey about whether you're in engineering, in life sciences, or physical sciences. We don't have that kind of granularity in order to be able to really answer that question specifically. I can't disclose what professional societies that we surveyed. So we could look just by professional society, but then I'd have to disclose like what societies we surveyed. And I do believe whatever biology societies we surveyed were later in the sample. Unfortunately, there's certain things that we can't answer with that. Yeah.
Did you find differences between, say, physical sciences and biological sciences?
We definitely want to look at that more closely. Yeah, I'm actually really curious about the differences in those different fields, as well as the kinds of arguments that get used as the basis for inclusion. So in some fields, people believe that their LGBTQ status actually contributes something to their work, because in some biology fields, they believe that they can see biological processes that their heterosexual colleagues don't see. A lot of biology is taught in very heteronormative terms. Joan Roughgarden's book, Evolution's Rainbow, is a really important intervention into that, with her different view of social evolution. But yeah, so I actually am curious about looking at the different fields and looking at the different rationales that people use. But one sort of trend that people see overall in the literature is the more male-dominated the field, the fewer women that are in the field, the more likely it is to be difficult for LGBTQ folks as well.
Yeah, I was wondering that. I mean, in biology, there's probably a higher percentage of women faculty members in biology departments than, say, in physics departments. And I wonder, yeah, just how different it is depending on the male-female ratio. That would make sense.
Yeah, and some of the early organizing in this world of biology, Rochelle Diamond, who's one of the founders of Lagels and Nagelstep, is herself a biologist. And a lot of that early organizing happened during the AIDS era, right? So there was a lot of kind of overlap between AIDS activism and LGBTQ inclusion and advocating for LGBTQ perspectives in STEM because of the homophobia that was so endemic within the AIDS research that was going on. And the need to educate folks about the truth about AIDS and HIV and how it is transmitted and so forth.
I have a question, if you may. You hear me?
Yeah.
So Tom, thank you very much for your talk. In your plots where you were showing different obstacles that were higher for people, the variance for the LGBTQ people also was higher. And then you were talking also about heteronormativity, and it seems to me, I don't know if this variability has to do that LGBTQ plus people, there are different levels because you have people who are more closer to what is expected from an heteronormative point of view, and some people that are farther away. And in my opinion, I don't know if this is supported by data, but it seems that the closer you are to the ideal heteronormative kind of person, let's say you have a stable relationship, a monogamous relationship, you are cis, and so on, the easier it will become to be part of the community in science and less judged. Is this supported by data? Is this one of the sources of this variability, or how do you explain it? Do you have any data?
Yes, absolutely, and that's sort of the trend that Erin shows in her paper on the white heteronormativity of right heteronormative privilege in STEM. Is yes, the closer that you are to that norm, the better time that you have in the field, in general. And that, really reveals the kind of way that white cis heteropatriarchy operates behind this sort of veneer of being apolitical and being just STEM is just objective, but it already is political because of this way that straight white men have this sort of advantage. All this sort of different maneuvering that LGBTQ people do, like having to kind of reveal a relationship or have a website that has a flag on it or something like that. These are all things that could potentially be seen as political, but the analogous behaviors for straight people are just seen as normal. Talking about your partner, or talking about your website, or talking about your family. Even, and also, we found many cases of straight men going to strip clubs and lots of women describe experiences of sexual harassment. So it is, STEM is a sexualized space, but the meaning of it being sexualized is differentially applied, if you're LGBTQ or not, especially producing advantages for white heterosexual men.
There's another question in the chat from RJ Murray, who says, as someone not in the LGBT community, what would you recommend as a starting point to support our LGBT peers?
That's a great question for LGBTQ folks in STEM. I'm not in STEM anymore, but there's been lots of best practices guides that have been published. The LGBTQ plus physicists have a best practices guide, as well as the American Astronomical Society produced a best practices guide for producing policies and institutions and changing cultures such that workplaces can be more inclusive for LGBTQ folks. But if you're interested in being an ally, I think you can always talk with LGBTQ folks about how can I be your ally. I think any kind of ally work, I struggle with this. I'm trying to be an ally for people of color, but I would never just declare myself an ally, because whether or not you're being an ally is sort of on the terms of the people you're trying to be an ally for. You've always kind of got to put their voice first and think about what their needs are, and ask, like, how can I be a better ally? And also sort of reading about being an ally. There's some good literature, especially in the fields of education, that looks at ways of being an ally.
Yeah, I had an experience just a few months ago. A colleague made a very stupid homophobic joke. And I had to say, this is a faculty reception, to this person, that was really homophobic thing to say, and I can't believe you said that. And several other colleagues at the table didn't say anything. And afterwards, one of them apologized profusely and said she should have said something, she kicking herself for not saying something. But for, to be an ally means it shouldn't be the person in, a particular group who's maybe something has happened at their expense, that it's only up to us to say something. It should be up to everyone.
I think it's important to acknowledge too that being an ally can come with risks itself, because I've worked to be an ally for trans folks in my own field, and that has, in the eyes of some people, undermined my credibility with them because they think that trans isn't real or something like that. So it can come with challenges and risks if you're willing to take that on. It can be very worthwhile, and we always welcome allies.